Okay, so things are getting a little bit more challenging lately to try to get even one video done. Not only do I need to do my research, but I also need to have some place or some time to be able to record it. And both of those aspects have been challenged lately with the difficulties we're going through, like power outs that have started again. And then the neighbor who is drilling and hammering because he's got his apartment he's trying to remodel. And so I can't exactly work there at the apartment because it's too loud. It's so loud I can't even hear a video when I've got it full blast. So I come to the coffee shop here, but a lot of people are coming because of the weather. It started to snow today in April, so it's quite interesting. So I made the video here recently, tried to at least. I think I'm going to have to go over some of the issues again. So for example, let's talk about our source materials that we're using with this. Of course, there's the Old Testament, there's the Apocrypha or Deuterocanonical books, and there's the New Testament. Those are obvious. But then we're also using some of the church fathers, but not much, because they don't have much to do with the physical appearance of the veil or the physical arrangement of the temple itself. But we are using Josephus, obviously Josephus, the letter of Aristeas, and the Mishnah and Talmud we're not really using, but we're referring to, so you can see what kind of how the rabbinic Jews handled the information that was there. You know, sometimes representing it accurately and sometimes fabricating it out of thin air. So, and then Philo is someone else that we will be referring to. So Philo has some good material for us to use on this issue. Now, you may not know who or what some of those things are. That's all right. Just hang in there. You'll learn some of this as we go. I want to first talk about the sequence of the temples, okay? And then the years when the temples were standing, the gaps that happened and the events in the gaps, the permanence of each or lack of permanence, then the inner and outer divisions. That's the division of the outer part to the holy place and the division of the holy place to the Holy of Holies and what that meant. Then we're going to talk about the spiritual meanings of all of these things. And what all of these things are, you don't know right now, but you will know as we go through this. So, I usually don't go into the details like a table of contents of what we're going to cover, but that's what we're going to cover. Let's deal first with the sequence. And what I mean by sequence is that, well, clearly if you've read the Bible, you will know that it started out with the tabernacle. That was the first housing, so to speak, of God. The place where God would meet with man face to face, so to speak. Not exactly face to face, because it says no one can look on God and live, they die. And yet we do have some examples where the 70 elders, for example, with Moses and Aaron, actually met with God on the mountain. So there's some question about how to interpret that as well. But we won't get into that right here. Let's keep going. The tabernacle, that's the first thing. It was like a big tent with portable furniture that you could pack up and you could move because they were going through the desert. They were living in the desert and traveling for 40 years. So then you had not David build the temple, but his son Solomon, who built the first permanent housing for God to come meet with man. That's Solomon's temple. Then after that was Zerubbabel's temple. You say, the what? Zerubbabel. All right, now if you've read the prophets, you'll have run across this name. But Zerubbabel's temple was next. Then, after that, King Herod the Great decided to add on to the temple and do some remodeling, reconstruction work. And that was the last stage. Those are the four that we're dealing with: the tabernacle, Solomon's temple, Zerubbabel's temple, and then Herod's add-ons. So now that we've covered the sequence of them, let's talk about the years and the gaps and events in the gaps. So when we talk about the tabernacle, we can say it was roughly about 1446 BC. All right, that's 1 year that's used. It's a more traditional year. So we'll say 1446 BC. BC means before Christ's birth. Okay? So then Solomon's temple was built around 966 BC and was finished in 959 BC. Now remember that BC, it counts down as it goes forward in time. So you can kind of treat it like a minus sign, right? Like minus 966 to minus 959. Then you think of it right. Okay? And it's moving towards the birth of Christ, which is right in the middle. Okay? So the years are actually counted from the birth of Christ, both directions. The years before him and the years after his birth. All right, so there we go. So when you say 966 to 959, it means they began building in the year 966 or minus 966, and they finished in the year minus 959. That's what the BC is. It's like a minus sign. And you might ask, well, all right, how long did it stand? Well, it was destroyed in 586 BC, that's minus 586, by Nebuchadnezzar, right, who destroyed it in the siege of Jerusalem. So how long did it stand? About 500 years. So how long was it between the tabernacle and Solomon's temple? That was about 500 years. Okay, so you can see that 1446 to 959 BC when it was finished being built. So if you look at the years, you've got 1446 for the tabernacle, and then you've got 959 we can count because that's when it was finished being built for Solomon's temple. And what you do is you have to subtract 959 from 1446. What you get is 487 years. So it's about 500 years. Then from Solomon's temple to Zerubbabel's temple, it's about 450 years. Then from Zerubbabel's temple to AD 70, when the temple was destroyed, was 600 years. So on average, you've got about 500 years between each of those events. So between the Solomon's temple and Zerubbabel's temple, you had the destruction of Solomon's temple. That happened when the Jews were taken into exile to Babylon. Then when they returned, that's when they built Zerubbabel's temple. And that's in the Bible. You can read about it in the Bible. Then later, what happened was that it was completed about 516 BC. You actually can read that there. And Herod began his reconstruction about 20 BC, 19 BC. And he finished it, well, he died first, but it was finished a little bit later at 63 AD, and then just 7 years later, ironically the number 7 years later, the temple was razed to the ground. It was completely destroyed. As Jesus prophesied, every brick that was standing was turned over. And it said that the gold was melted in the fire in the temple, that the temple caught on fire, the gold melted, and that they were turning the bricks over to try to recover the gold that had seeped into the cracks. So now let's talk about the permanence of each of these things. When you get to the tabernacle, when Moses is instructed to build the tabernacle, and they do this, that the tabernacle is not meant to be permanent. It's meant to move with the people as they move about in the desert. So that's what it is. So they still don't have, even when they go into the land of Israel and Joshua leads them in and they establish the different areas in the land, that they still don't have a permanent temple. So the tabernacle is still functioning in that way. But then when Solomon builds the temple, that is permanent until the destruction of it, razed to the ground, but it's a new temple. It was destroyed enough where it is a new temple. It's considered a new temple. Herod's reconstruction, though, or add-ons, or construction, however you want to word it, his expansion was an addition to what God instructed to be built. It was man's ornamentation, expansion, glorification of the temple. And so it was just demonstrating how far the Jews had gone from God and become like the Gentiles. So it's no surprise that 7 years after it was finished, God destroyed the entire temple, and it has not been rebuilt physically in that place. That's the only place it could be built. So when we're talking about the divisions, we're talking about the division between the outer part and the holy place, and then the division between the holy place and the Holy of Holies. I'll try to show you a diagram of this so that you can see it more clearly. I'm going to go ahead and just tell you what the evidence says, and then if you want to, you can watch another video I'll make where I'm going to read the sources and talk about those. So right now what we know is that the tabernacle had an outer veil and an inner veil. The outer veil was between the outer part and the holy place, and the inner veil was between the holy place and the Holy of Holies. When you get to Solomon's temple, though, you've got doors on the outer part for the holy place, but then you've got a very interesting thing happen. You've got two different recordings of what is dividing the holy place from the Holy of Holies. You got in Kings and Chronicles, and one of them's earlier than the other. And the one mentions a veil, and then the other mentions doors. And it looks like the doors are later. And so if you think about Solomon's life and the progression that happened, or the degradation that happened over time, you see that he increasingly shut his heart off to God. He turned aside to other gods through the wives that he married from other ethnic groups. So what we see is Solomon changing it from a veil to changing it to doors that could be shut, that could be locked, to keep God in, so that he didn't feel more guilty about turning to other gods, so that he wasn't living in an awareness of God seeing him changing to other gods. Now, literally, he knew that wasn't possible, but the symbolism is inescapable. Going from a veil that cannot be locked to doors that can be closed and sealed and locked for the holiest place to be sealed off. And this is what happens leading up to the captivity of the Jews and taking them to Babylon. This was the last stage of Solomon's temple when it was destroyed in the siege of Jerusalem. Then when you come back, they come back and they start rebuilding the temple. They put a veil and doors on the outer part, and then a veil on the inner part between the holy place and the Holy of Holies. Or at least the veil plus doors is there in Herod's temple, Herod's add-ons to the temple. We don't know exactly that that was there in Zerubbabel's temple before Herod's construction, but we know it was there after, and you'll hear that in the sources as we read through those. But what's interesting is that on that outer part, on the outside of the doors, the veil, that tapestry, is described as a Babylonian ornate tapestry like of the cosmos, not of cherubim like the inner veil that was made. And so you've got this kind of idolatry introduced, or rather precursor to scientism, where the universe takes a central role and angelic guardians are like jettisoned from it. Now, not completely, but especially on this outer part. And so that's like the face to the people. So you can see this is a very interesting situation. Now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the omens in the temple and when they stopped and what happened with the lots for the two goats, the goat sacrificed and the goat that was the scapegoat, and what happened with the high priest and drawing the lots. This is actually from the Talmud, the later rabbinical Jewish literature. But it's very interesting because it actually supports the Christian declaration that Jesus is the Messiah. And when he came, the temple sacrificial system was finished even before he died.
Yeah.
So we will go ahead and look at that in detail now that we've got all that structure and that history and architecture and the meanings of those in place for the temple and for the dividers between those parts. All right, I want to draw attention to something here that is very astounding. We know that in the gospel accounts it says that when Jesus died, the temple curtain, the inner veil between the holy place and the Holy of Holies, was torn in two from the top to bottom. Then we see that the Talmud in Gittin 56b.9 records Titus in 70 AD at the destruction of the temple. Before it's destroyed, he goes in with his sword into the holy place and he tears the curtain with his sword, and blood comes out of the curtain. This is what the rabbinic Jews record that Titus did in 70 AD and was given the power then to destroy the temple. And since then, the blood sacrifices have stopped. They've not been able to be performed by the priests at all. It's as if God, first in Christ's death, crucifixion, tears the temple curtains and says, enough is enough. And then, since they continued to do that, maybe even, as I speculate, they replaced that veil with a new one, Titus comes in with his power, with his sword, and cuts it, tears it down, just cuts it from top to bottom, and blood comes from it, and he destroys the entire temple. God said, enough is enough. I already tried to stop you once. This is the final step. You're stopped. So this description of a Babylonian tapestry with cosmic imagery on it is witnessed in both Philo's writings and Josephus. And Philo was contemporaneous with the crucifixion because he died in 50 AD. So when he was writing this, it was about the time of the crucifixion. But then you've got Herod, who started the renovations in about 20 BC. And it's most likely, when you contrast the letter of Aristeas, which is about the Septuagint and its creation, which was hundreds of years before Christ, and his description of the temple veil doesn't mention anything about Babylonian origin or cosmic imagery, which would be significant, especially since he is a Jew. He was a Jew. So when you contrast that with the descriptions by Philo and Josephus, it looks exactly like Herod changed that. He put the cosmic imagery up in the temple from Babylon, which is just scandalous. But that's exactly Herod's style of Hellenizing things. So I think we can say with great confidence that Herod did indeed install that outer veil that has the cosmic imagery in Babylonian style on the temple of the Jews, which is absolutely horrendous, because that would be like putting Nazi symbols in there, because their temple was destroyed and they were taken into captivity by Babylon. So what's significant is that the Talmud actually records 4 omens that started in the year 30 AD, 40 years before the temple destruction. And one of them is about the lots that the high priest would draw for the two goats, as to which goat is going to be sacrificed and which to be given to God, and the other one is going to be sent out into the wilderness, the scapegoat. And so the lot would appear in the left hand, sometimes in the right, starting with the death of this high priest, Shimon Hatzadik. Now, he died at the end of the Septuagint project. Now, I'm going to blow your mind with this, because the Septuagint project was where God was replacing the Hebrew translation. Now, it doesn't look like this exactly, but when you stand back and look at it, it does. The Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of Moses, were in Hebrew in the temple in Jerusalem. Then what happened was that the Septuagint project started to try to make a copy of this in Greek, a translation that they could store in Alexandria. So they began that by asking the high priest at that time, Eleazar, if they could have access to this and translate this into Greek. So he agreed, and they did that. That was under Ptolemy the First. Now, many of you will say, no, it's Ptolemy the Second, but no, it's not. If you read carefully the letter, there are 2 parts, and the first part takes place under the king, who's unnamed, but his father's named. It says his father's name, and that's the name of the stepfather for Ptolemy the First. Because if it had been Ptolemy the Second who was the king, and it was referring to his father, it would have referred to Ptolemy the First as the father, but it doesn't. It refers to the father of Ptolemy the First as the father of the king under that first part of the project. And this is exactly the problem, the beef I have with scholarship, is that they don't pay attention to the details, and they want to turn everything into a myth that they don't like. All right, so anyway, we got that established, and then under Ptolemy II, that's when they started collecting the oral traditions of the Jews and writing them down formally for the first time. They weren't even written down in Hebrew formally for the first time. So this is the first time, and it's in Greek. And that then together formed the whole collection of the testimony of God at that time, the Old Testament, with the apocryphal books, deuterocanonical books. They weren't seen as separate at all. They were actually integrated in with those. They were the Old Testament. So to separate them out and give them a different name is artificial. It's not correct. But the Greek scriptures, the completion of that was completed, and Shimon Hatzadik, I think I'm saying it right, died around that time, and then the Omens started like giving warning signs. It wasn't completely never in the right hand, but it was sometimes in the left, sometimes in the right. During Shimon's time as high priest, it was always, without exception, showing up in his right hand. And that was mathematically impossible. But then when he died, that's when it never showed up in the right hand consistently. It was left, right, left, left, right. It was like sporadic, like warning shots. God was sending warning shots to the Jews that something is wrong. You've got to get this right. And he sent warning shots with the Greek scriptures too. Then when we get to Jesus being baptized in 30 AD, this is when, in 30 AD, 40 years before the destruction of the temple, the Talmud itself records that 40 years before the destruction of the temple, 4 omens started appearing. And one of them was about the lot that was never appearing in the right hand, ever, anymore. And so this they took as an omen of coming destruction. All 4 of these omens they took, the Jews did, the rabbinic Jews, in the Talmud say that they took this historically at that time when they were happening as a sign of coming destruction. So the Jews themselves indicate that Jesus was the Messiah. He started his ministry that year when the omen stopped showing up in the right hand ever again. Never again did it show up in the right hand of the high priest. And so when the temple was destroyed, that ended it. So the coming of Christ and the beginning of his ministry actually was the final, that was it. It was irreversible at that point. Okay, so let's talk about these other omens that started at the time of Jesus' ministry and his baptism. So we talked about the lot, the drawing of the lot, right, for the goats. Then there's the crimson thread. That's a thread of red wool that was tied to the scapegoat. After the goat was cast off the cliff, it was said to turn white, fulfilling Isaiah 1:18. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. It stopped turning white in 30 AD. That was one of the 4 omens the rabbinic Jews record as an omen of coming destruction. And they record this in the Talmud. They themselves, it's not a Christian writing, there is no Christian influence on it. The atoning mechanism visibly failed the Western lamp. The Talmud lamp that was never supposed to go out kept going out, the eternal flame failing. It was not supposed to go out, but it kept failing. No matter how much they tried to prepare and keep it going, it kept going out. Then the doors. So Yohanan ben Zakkai rebuked the temple, saying, O temple, why do you frighten yourself? I know you will be destroyed. This is in the Talmud. The doors opening by themselves was interpreted as the temple announcing its own desolation, referencing Zechariah 11:1. The rabbis saw all 4 as omens of destruction. They did not connect them to Jesus, but the timing is the Talmud's own witness against itself. So then, when we get to the point in the gospel account where Jesus dies on the cross, and it says the temple curtain, the veil that conceals the Holy of Holies, tears in 2 from top to bottom. Well, we shouldn't be surprised, because the Talmud itself testifies such things were already happening. And even echoes of it were starting all the way back at the time of the completion of the Septuagint. I cannot overstate the significance and importance of the Septuagint. It was the first real concrete sign of God breaking off the branch of the Jews because of their hardened hearts, their unrepentant hearts. God was breaking them off. And he was starting to show that already, all the way back then, when Shimon, who they considered a righteous rabbi, died. And after that, they started getting these echoes of this omen that then, in the first year of Jesus' ministry, at his baptism, just broke loose. There were 4 of them. And the lot, never appearing in the right hand, was one of the strongest ones. That they did not have God's approval anymore. And there was no sacrifice for sins anymore in the temple. I hope this has really blessed you. May the Lord bless you as you seek him with all your heart.